Hey guys, tonight we saddle up for a long, slow gallop across the endless grasslands of Central Asia. The wind's gentle, the horses are shaggy, and the ground hums with the muffled rhythm of hooves. You're riding a sturdy Mongol pony, short, scruffy, and annoyingly eager to sprint for hours without a break. The sky above you is an enormous watercolor smear of lavender and gold, stretching from one invisible horizon to the other. Welcome to the Mongol Empire. You're about to deliver the mail, and no, you probably won't survive this in real life, unless you enjoy ice in your boots, wolf attacks, and meat that's been sun-dried in a saddlebag. But don't worry, you're safe in bed, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by zero arrows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and the time where you are. I love seeing where in the world you're nodding off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your fingers grip the reins a little tighter as your pony picks up speed. The steppe opens like a living map. Tufts of grass blur into gold and green stripes. There are no road signs, no pavement, no podcasts, just a rhythm of hooves and breath and the occasional snort from your overly motivated travel companion. You're part of something big, whether you realize it or not. The Mongol Empire's communication system, known as the Yam or Urtu, is centuries ahead of its time. It stretches across thousands of miles, from the cold forests of Siberia to the soft deserts of Persia. And somehow, against every possible odd, it works. Messages travel from one side of the known world to the other in mere days. It's like being part of a high-speed, horse-powered internet, except instead of fiber optic cables, there are yurts, fermented milk, and a lot of dust in your teeth. As you ride, the air cools and the steppe begins to change color. Shadows stretch long and thin. You spot something ahead, a dark blotch on the horizon. It's your next stop, a relay station. You're not alone out here. Riders just like you are scattered across the empire, galloping in both directions, delivering scrolls, orders, gossip, and the occasional care package of dried horse jerky. Each of you has a route. Yours is about 25 miles. After that, you switch horses, maybe gulp some warm yak milk, and keep going. You're not supposed to dawdle. Genghis Khan didn't conquer most of Asia, so his messengers could hang around chatting about the weather. Speed is everything. In fact, it's said that his armies were only as strong as the information that reached them, and reached them fast. The Khan didn't just love war, he loved a good logistical diagram. He divided his empire with the same precision you might use when folding fitted sheets, except successfully. Roads, stations, rosters of riders, it was all laid out like a living diagram of control. And those horses? They were chosen not for beauty, but for sheer indifference to suffering. The Mongol horse doesn't care if it's raining. It doesn't care if it's snowing. Honestly, it doesn't even care if you fall off. It'll probably just keep going and deliver the letter on its own. You lean forward as your pony picks up the scent of its home turf. These animals are oddly smart. Some even argue they're better at navigating the steppe than the people riding them. And historians still argue whether the whole YAM system was more military tool or civil infrastructure. Like an early postal service meets a mobile war machine. For now, you're just one piece in the massive moving puzzle. As the first stars prick through the indigo sky, you begin to hear a sound, Wind rustling against yurts, the far-off bleating of sheep, and the distant creak of a wooden wheel. The station is close. You can smell the smoke from a dung fire, and maybe, if you're lucky, some dumplings sizzling in a pot. But don't get your hopes up. You're not stopping long. It's funny how quiet it is, even with all this motion. There are no billboards out here, no ringing phones, no podcasts debating the best oat milk brands, just the occasional falcon overhead, probably judging your posture. You reach the edge of the station, and the pony slows instinctively. A young boy in a fur-lined cap trots over to take the reins. You hand over the small pouch tied to your belt, sealed with wax and wrapped in worn felt. Inside, you don't know. You're not supposed to know, but you imagine it's something important, or at least weird. As you slide off the horse, your legs wobble with that half-numb tingle of a long ride. Someone hands you a wooden bowl of something warm and sour. You sip. It's not great, but it's better than chewing saddle leather. The stars brighten. The grass whispers. And just when your bones start to settle, someone calls your name. Another horse is ready. Another pouch is tied to the saddle. Another rider, well, you must get going. This is your life now. Short bursts of speed across a massive empire, fueled by goat stew and imperial ambition. But hey, at least the scenery changes. You stretch your back, crack your knuckles, and mount up again. The night is still young, and the next station isn't going to reach itself. The second you're back in the saddle, your pony jolts forward like it's been promised an oat buffet at the next station. You bounce a little in the stirrups, because Mongol saddles weren't built for comfort. They were built for dominance and maybe mild spine damage. Ahead, the steppe glows faintly under the stars, the land rolling like a velvet sea with no end in sight. You settle into the rhythm again. The clop-thud-clop of hooves is hypnotic, almost musical, almost relaxing, if not for the creeping chill and the knowledge that wolves are a real thing out here. Not bedtime story wolves, actual wolves. Now that you're alone again, it's a good time to reflect on how the system you're part of came to be. Genghis Khan, yes, that Genghis Khan, wasn't just a conquering warlord with dramatic cheekbones and a terrifying reputation. He was also the kind of guy who loved a good spreadsheet in spirit. The urto, or yam, wasn't just an afterthought. It was one of his main tools for ruling an empire so sprawling it stretched from the Yellow Sea to the Danube. You imagine the Khan himself sitting in a yurt, sketching out relay routes in the dirt with a stick, sipping fermented mare's milk, and muttering things like, "No, Batu, if we put the station too close to the goat herders, they'll eat the paper again." The basic idea was simple. Set up stations every 25 to 30 miles, roughly a day's hard ride apart, staff them with attendants, stock them with supplies. Most importantly, keep a fresh horse waiting, always. Because when one rider staggered in, crusted in dust and probably slightly hallucinating, the next rider would leap onto a rested mount and continue. It was a relay race, but instead of a baton, you handed over secrets, scrolls, and sometimes bags of cheese. The genius of it wasn't just the scale, it was the standardization. These stations weren't left to chance. The Khan issued specific orders about how they should be built, where they should be placed, and even what they should serve riders. He didn't want any surprises. A letter sent from Karakorum could make it to Persia in less than 2 weeks. That's faster than some modern mail when you forget to pay for tracking. What's truly wild is that the Mongols didn't even invent this system from scratch. Earlier empires, the Persians, the Chinese, had used couriers and roads, but the Mongols turned the concept into a tightly run, empire-spanning machine. Genghis even adopted ideas from conquered regions, tweaking them to fit the brutal efficiency of the steppe lifestyle. Historians still argue whether he saw it first as a military tool or as a civil necessity, but either way, it became the invisible thread holding the empire together. And here's a fun fringe detail for your dreams tonight. Some stations were so well equipped that riders could arrive to find not only a fresh horse, but also pre-cooked food, warm bedding, and even new boots. Imagine pulling into a gas station today and someone rushes out with a sandwich, slippers, and an oil change for your car, all in 30 seconds with a bow. That's what the Mongol relay stations were like, except with more sheep and fewer fluorescent lights. Your horse snorts as you pass a shallow creek. The water glitters beneath the moonlight. Somewhere nearby, the ground squelches. Maybe a hidden marsh. You steer wide. Though you feel like the only soul for miles, you know better. The system ran on people, thousands of them. Attendants, riders, scouts, blacksmiths, cooks, herders. It was a full operation. And the riders? Well, they had to be a special kind of tough. Endurance, courage, navigational skills, and the ability to survive on roasted goat knuckle and 2 hours of sleep. A Mongol postal rider could legally demand food and shelter from any local settlement, provided they showed the right credentials. This leads to something you'll learn more about later, a curious object called the paisa, essentially a passport engraved with Mongol script and symbols of authority. It gave riders the right to command services and bypass obstacles. Wave it, and people moved. No paisa? You might be walking the rest of the way home. Sans boots. And remember, these roads weren't roads in the modern sense. No cobblestones, no mile markers, just open steppe, loose trails and landmarks whispered from one rider to the next. Turn right at the three-armed tree, they'd say, then ride until you smell burnt milk and hear dogs arguing. Precise. Still, somehow it all worked. The messages flowed. The armies coordinated. News traveled at terrifying speed. And through it all, those relay riders kept moving. Part warrior, part mailman, part caffeine-fueled road tripper before caffeine was even a thing. As you crest a small rise, you spot the next station glowing faintly with firelight. Another dark shape, another low, domed yurt, nestled into the ground like it's hiding from the wind. Your pony picks up the pace without being asked. It knows the rhythm now. So do you. You wonder briefly, what's inside the scroll you're carrying now? A message from a general? An order for more sheep? Maybe a tax reminder or some imperial gossip? You'll never know. Your job is the gallop. The rest is for someone else. As the station nears, you feel a new appreciation for how the Mongols kept their empire stitched together. Not with stone walls or high towers, but with motion, discipline, and thousands of hoofbeats across the grass. Your pony clatters to a stop just outside the yurt, panting but still eager. You dismount with a practiced wobble and hand the message to a man in a fur hat. He doesn't smile, but he nods. Another horse is ready. Another stretch lies ahead. You breathe in the cold night air and swing yourself back into the saddle. The wind picks up again, and so do you. The wind's sharper now, thinner, colder. It slices through your layers as your new horse breaks into a trot. You tuck your chin, hunch your shoulders, and keep going. The stars are still out, and the ground feels like it never changes. But you know better. You're climbing slightly now, rolling into the edge of the Kangai Mountains, the kind of place that separates the postal tourists from the true steppe veterans. Still, you've got a decent pony beneath you, a warmed-up saddle, and the lingering taste of that last station's curiously smoky tea. Honestly, it might have been boiled goat water. You're not going to ask. This next stretch, though, it's the kind of terrain that makes you appreciate why the Mongols didn't just ride everywhere willy-nilly. The Urtu had structure. It needed it. Because while the postal road system wasn't paved or lined with Starbucks, it was mapped, painstakingly, often orally, with detailed geographic knowledge passed from one rider to the next. You didn't just need to be fast. You needed to know how to read the land like it was a scroll written in soil and shadow. So tonight, let's talk about how this whole crazy web of hoofbeats and way stations was laid out. It started with the Khan himself. Genghis and later Ogadai and Kublai sent scouts to chart the best routes. These weren't just any scouts. They were often local guides, tribal leaders, or traveling monks with absurd memories and even better lungs. They traced the most reliable paths. Where water was frequent, pastures were strong, and bandits were mostly avoidable. Then those paths became arteries, some broad and heavily trafficked, others narrow and secretive. And these weren't just east-west superhighways. The Mongol postal network was multi-directional. One rider might be galloping from the heart of Mongolia toward Samarkand, while another zipped north toward what we now call Siberia. Historians still argue whether the system's true strength came from its sheer coverage or its adaptability, but either way, it was vast. Over 200,000 horses were reportedly kept in rotation at its height. That's enough horses to start a very anxious music festival. Here's a strange but true detail. Some riders trained their horses to follow the postal trail instinctively. With repetition and careful conditioning, a horse could begin recognizing landmarks, nudging toward the next station on its own, even through heavy fog or snow. Think of it as biological GPS, minus the voice saying, recalculating. You crest another slope. Below you, the land opens into a bowl of stars and frost. A stream cuts through the valley like a silver ribbon. It's too deep to ford now, so you follow the bank until a rockier crossing appears, likely one chosen by centuries of hoofprints. The Mongols were obsessed with momentum. They knew that an empire so massive couldn't wait for messengers stuck in a snowdrift. So the relay paths weren't just laid out efficiently, they were monitored. Local governors, appointed by the Khan or his generals, were responsible for maintaining the section in their territory. If a station fell into disrepair, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a failure of imperial communication. Punishments varied, but being reassigned to latrine duty in winter was probably not uncommon. As you clatter across a narrow wooden bridge, barely wide enough for your pony's hooves, you think about how this system allowed intelligence and decrees to travel faster than armies. A single order could leapfrog ahead of a battalion and change its course by the time it reached its target. That's power, not just brute force, but fast brute force, coordinated by scribes, dispatch riders, and horses with surprisingly good memories. Not all of it was military either. This same network carried administrative scrolls, tax records, trade agreements, and even philosophical letters between scholars. There's one account of a Nestorian Christian priest in the Mongol Empire sending theological questions all the way to Baghdad via horse relay. Probably took a few weeks and a lot of oats, but still, some messages were sealed inside wooden capsules, roughly the size of your forearm, slotted into the rider's belt or saddlebag. Others were etched into bone, silk, or paper, depending on urgency and whether the recipient had good lighting at home. There are even accounts of fragrant dispatches, messages perfumed or smoked with incense so that the receiver could verify their origin by scent, trust by nose, but not everything was so romantic. One downside of riding through imperial relay paths was that you were always visible to local leaders. Many stations kept logs of who passed through and when. You couldn't just detour for a nap and blame a flat tire. If a rider was late without good reason, it reflected poorly on the whole system. You were expected to be precise, even if your horse decided today was the day it feared puddles. Rounding a bend now, you see a low circle of stones. It's the remnants of an ancient station, burned down maybe, or just retired long ago. The wind whistles through it. A broken yurt pole sticks up like a tooth from the ground. You wonder how many thousands of riders pass this exact spot, clutching imperial orders or whispered secrets. And then there's a noise behind you. Another rider. You glance back to see a silhouette gaining steadily. You make room. They pass with a nod, disappearing into the cold. Just like that, the system keeps moving. It's not glamorous. There are no parades for postal riders. You don't get your face on currency, but you are the invisible link between decision and execution, between city and frontier, between Khan and conquered, and tonight under these quiet stars and the long, dark sky, you're part of it. You adjust your scarf. Your horse snorts. Somewhere ahead, another fire glows. The next morning creeps up on you like a slow drumbeat, the frost melting off your boots, your horse giving a low snuffling sigh, and the sky bleeding into a pale gray. You're riding into flatter country now. Grasses shimmer with dew, and somewhere in the distance, you can just make out the domes of a Mongol noble's summer camp. But you're not stopping for tea with the aristocrats today. No, your path veers toward the unsung heroes of the empire, the station keepers, the yams, the beating heart of this whole postal web. Now let's talk about the Urtu stations. You'll be seeing a lot of them. These weren't just roadside pit stops. Each one was a kind of micro-ecosystem part, stable part intelligence center, and sometimes, let's be honest, a glorified gossip hub with yurts. Built roughly 25 to 30 miles apart a good day's ride. If your horse was cranky, they were usually operated by families given special status by the Khan himself. These families called Yamchi were exempt from taxes and military service in exchange for hosting riders, feeding them, swapping out horses, and keeping the whole engine humming. You can see one now in the distance, a pale curl of smoke rising above low, rounded tents. A dog barks lazily as you approach. The station head, an older man with eyebrows so thick they could serve as winter insulation, waves you in. He doesn't ask your name. He knows the uniform, the seal, the rhythm of your pony's breathing. Inside, it's warm. You're handed a cup of Arag fermented mare's milk that tastes like someone left yogurt in a thunderstorm. But you're too tired to care. You sip and listen as the Yamchi tells a tale about a previous rider who allegedly delivered an urgent dispatch while sleepwalking. Possibly apocryphal. Possibly Tuesday. Here's a fun quirk: these stations were stocked not just with fresh horses, but also with spare gear. Saddles, boots, even scrolls for messages if you ran out. If your belt broke, they'd patch it. If you tore your robe dodging a low-hanging branch, they'd lend you another. And if your horse, well, let's say it had an opinion about working today, they'd swap it for one less philosophical. Historians still argue whether these stations were strictly regulated across the empire or left more flexible by region. What's clear is that their upkeep was a serious matter. The great Khans didn't tolerate laziness or neglect. Periodic inspections were made by officials known as tamgachi, who could arrive unannounced and take notes on the quality of the oats or the attitude of the staff. You did not want a bad review from a tamgachi. One poor report and your family might lose its tax-free status. Or worse, be reassigned to snow clearing in the Altai Mountains, which, let's be honest, was just retirement with more frostbite. But Orto stations weren't just for official business. Sometimes foreign envoys were permitted to use them with a special paisa, a sort of passport medallion issued by the Khan. You could flash it like an imperial VIP pass, and suddenly yurts opened up, horses lined up, and your era got slightly less sour. Marco Polo famously carried such a pass, which is probably why his stories had so many horses and not enough sore feet. Some stations grew into little proto-towns, places where merchants, smiths, and herders gathered because they knew there'd always be travelers. A smart yamshi might brew extra tea-men gear on the side, or even trade news between riders going in opposite directions. It was like a medieval roadside diner. If diners had Mongolian throat singing and a 10% chance of sudden horse theft, there's an ambient coziness to this one. You watch the stable boy, no older than 12, brushing down your previous mount. He hums tunelessly as if the horse will fall asleep to it. Maybe it does. In this world, even animals seem to understand the rhythm of travel. A rooster crows outside. It's time to move again. Your new mount is shorter but faster, one of those wiry step ponies with a deep chest and questionable decision-making. The Yamchi hands you a bundle of dried cheese and a nod that says, no need to rush, unless you're late. Classic Mongol subtlety. As you ride away, the wind picks up. There's a sharpness to it now, less forgiving. You duck your head thinking back to the station. Not glamorous, not grand, but deeply dependable. And here's the kicker: Mongol postal riders weren't lone wolves. The system ran on trust. Each station knew the next. Each family held its post like a link in a very furry, very galloping chain. The empire wasn't just big, it was connected. And that made all the difference. You cross a flat plain, now the hooves of your pony drumming a lullaby against the earth. Somewhere ahead, another station waits. Another family. Another boiling pot of something you're not brave enough to identify. And the empire keeps breathing. You're deep into it now. The road, the rhythm, the quiet kind of loneliness that only comes from watching the world blur by at a pony's pace. The wind has settled, the day has warmed slightly, and you're somewhere between two nameless hills galloping through time itself. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and feel every mile in your bones. And then it hits you, the thought, how in the dusty hoofbeats of history did they train all these postal horses? After all, they weren't just random ponies snagged from the steppe. Mongol horses were a breed apart, compact, hardy, and so stubborn you could mistake them for philosophers. But they were also the engines of the empire, the four-legged fuel that made the whole machine go. And like any good engine, they had to be trained, tuned, and sometimes, let's be honest, tricked into doing their job. You pass a herd now off to your right, grazing with deceptive serenity. They look like they wouldn't mind a nap more than a gallop. But that's the trick. Mongol horses weren't built for speed so much as endurance. They could run long distances with minimal water, graze while walking, and had hooves so tough they rarely needed shoes. One historical account describes a Mongol horse surviving 3 days of hard riding on just frozen grass and determination. Try that with a modern scooter. Training began early. Foals were handled from birth, taught to respond to human voices, and gradually introduced to gear. But riding didn't come until later, and not gently. Mongol kids often learned to ride before they could properly walk, meaning that by age 4 or 5, they were already outpacing adults in other empires. Some writers joke that they were born on horseback, and honestly, it's not far off. The postal horses, unlike war mounts, had to be even-tempered responsive, and most of all unfazed by sudden swaps. You see, remember how riders were changed at stations. Sometimes only the horses were changed. That meant the animal needed to accept a complete stranger mid-journey, mid-stress, often mid-storm. Not every horse took kindly to that. Training, therefore, wasn't just about speed, it was about personality management, a fringe but delightful detail. Some station masters used songs to calm their herds, low humming melodies, part lullaby, part command. If you've never seen a row of step ponies nodding off to throat singing, you've missed out on one of history's weirdest soft rock concerts. And there was another trick, the two-horse relay. Some riders took off with a second horse trailing on a lead rope, switching mounts halfway through a leg without even stopping. It sounds chaotic, and it was, but when done well, it shaved precious minutes off long rides. Historians still argue whether this technique was common across the empire or a specialized skill for elite couriers. Either way, it required incredible trust between horse and rider, and between the two horses who had to get along better than most coworkers. You descend a gentle slope, now your pony's breath puffing in rhythmic clouds. There's a cool spring to the west, an ideal watering hole, and likely a known grazing point for relay animals. You guide your mount there and dismount, letting the horse drink. You stretch again, watching the way its ears flick toward every sound. Trained, alert, ready. Another rider passes, offering you a nod and a joke about the spring water tasting like sheep. You smile, sip it anyway, and confirm that, yes, it absolutely does. But the horses don't complain. That's what makes them perfect. Back in the saddle, you think of how each tour station kept dozens, sometimes hundreds of horses. Managing them required serious skill. Station masters knew which ponies were best for mountain routes, which hated rivers, and which would chase birds for miles if given the chance. They tracked feeding, health, temperament, all without spreadsheets. Just memory, intuition, and maybe a really good stick for note scratching. And these weren't owned horses in the Western sense. Many were part of a communal pool. Local nomads were required to contribute mounts to the system, part of their tax burden. In return, they were paid in grain, silver, or goods. This meant the horse network was also an economic one, binding nomadic and urban communities into mutual reliance. You gave horses, you got empire. Of course not. Everyone was thrilled. Some nomads tried to swap fast horses for lazy ones, sneaking the worst of the herd into the pool. In response, inspectors developed an eye for hoof wear, muscle tone, and the glint of mischief in a horse's eye. Mongol horse inspectors, yes, a real job, could tell more from a tail swish than most people could from a spreadsheet. You crest another ridge. The air's clearer now. Below, a field stretches wide, filled with more relay ponies neatly tethered and munching away. A station in the distance flickers with activity, and you realize something: this isn't just a riding network. It's a living, breathing organism, a circulatory system where horses are the blood pulsing from one corner of the world to another. You tighten the reins. Your mount lifts its head, ears forward. It knows the next leg before you do. And once again, the road continues. Your next leg takes you into hill country where the wind whispers through low grass and the earth begins to roll and tilt like a lazy ocean. Here, the ride feels different. You're constantly shifting your weight, adjusting your stance in the saddle, and guiding your pony with the softest touches. These aren't roads exactly, just desire paths etched into the land by centuries of hooves, wheels, and weather. And now it's time to talk about routes, the invisible veins that carried messages across an empire the size of a continent. Because let's be honest, it's one thing to send mail through familiar terrain, and quite another to cross deserts, rivers, swamps, and mountain passes just to deliver a message that might read, "Tell the governor to wait another week." Mongol postal routes weren't straight lines. They were elegant zigzags optimized for terrain weather and seasonal hazards. Your path might veer around a salt flat hopscotch, across rivers, detour through mountain valleys, or even skirt the edge of enemy territory. And yet somehow the messages arrived usually faster than anything Europe managed until the Industrial Revolution. Right now, you're riding what used to be the Western arterial route, a lesser-known cousin to the Silk Road. It's got fewer traders, fewer camels, and significantly more birds that want to dive bomb your helmet. But it's efficient. You know this because every rise in the land gives you a view of the next relay station, exactly where it should be, tucked beside a stream, near a patch of trees, and perfectly placed to make you think, "I could ride just a bit longer." This system didn't develop overnight. Early Mongol routes were mapped with the help of scouts, expert navigators who rode out with no road signs, no GPS, just their horses' stars, and an uncanny ability to remember that one oddly shaped boulder near the third tree. Over time, these routes were formalized. Small cairns or markers were sometimes left to help guide riders, but mostly it was all mental. You didn't need to see the road, you knew it. Historians still argue whether the Mongols developed a written master map or whether route knowledge was passed entirely orally between riders and station masters. What's certain is that the network was astonishingly consistent even across difficult terrain. From the Korean peninsula to the Caspian Sea, there were paths beaten by thousands of hoofbeats, invisible yet undeniable. Your pony picks up speed now, sensing the approach of another station. Ahead, the hills flatten slightly, revealing a wide river winding through the valley. There's a wooden footbridge to the left, but you take the shallow ford, the preferred way for riders like you. It's faster, riskier, and will absolutely leave your boots soaked for the next 3 hours. Congratulations. You're officially a soggy part of the empire now. There's a station just beyond the river. This one's larger, more yurts, a proper corral, even a small shrine to Tengri, the eternal blue sky deity of the Mongols. You dismount, teeth chattering slightly, and trade your horse for a fresh one, leaner, more energetic, possibly judging you. The station master, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a missing tooth, asks if the bridge still wobbles. You nod. She chuckles. "Still better than the ford," she mutters, handing you a bundle of dried turnip slices. Here's a lesser-known fact: different routes had different regional foods available at their stations. While central Mongol posts might offer milk curds and lamb, the western stretches included dried fruit, pickled roots, and occasionally salted fish if you were near a river. The diversity of snacks alone could make for a culinary tour of the empire if you had no sense of smell and very forgiving taste buds. Back in the saddle, you begin a steeper climb. The terrain is changing again. Trees reappear, scattered at first, then thicker, like the land is quietly gathering itself. These forested sections were the trickiest for route maintenance. Fallen trees flooding and animal ambushes looking at you. Wolves made regular patrols necessary. Some sections even required temporary wooden walkways or rope bridges. Imagine delivering mail while dangling over a ravine, hoping the message wasn't about troop movements. Still, the Mongols persisted. They posted guards at key passes, built signal fires for emergencies, and even used train birds to deliver ultra-short notes when terrain proved impassable. One account, likely exaggerated, but deliciously odd, describes a message tied to a hawk's leg reading, "Hold the fortress. Reinforcements en route. Also more salt." Fringe Fact 1, experimental postal branch, once tried goat messengers for river crossing regions. It failed spectacularly. Turns out goats hate being told what to do. But these failures were rare. The Mongol system was nimble, pragmatic, surprisingly adaptable. Routes shifted with the seasons, like migratory birds north in summer, south in winter, avoiding snowed-in passes and mud-slick valleys. Riders were trained not just to ride, but to read landscapes like maps. You knew which valley meant fast travel, and which one meant you're about to lose a boot. And so here you are leaning into the climb, gripping the reins as pine needles begin to scatter across the road like confetti. Another ridge, another mile, another piece of the empire stitched together by speed, endurance, and sheer logistical brilliance. The wind shifts again, cooler now. The sky begins to streak with evening gold. And ahead, just visible through the trees, you see the flicker of torchlight. Another station waits. Your pony is steaming slightly by the time you arrive at the station flanks. Damp hooves, muddy mane, tangled by a mischievous crosswind. You dismount, stretch, and accept a fresh cup of Arag fermented mare's milk from a station hand who looks no older than 13. It tastes like fizzy yogurt with ambitions. You smile politely, gulp it down, and try not to hiccup in front of the station master who's busy recording your arrival with a charcoal tally mark on what looks like a stretched piece of bark. This, you realize, is the beating heart of the system station life. Because while riders and horses did the moving, the stations made everything possible. Without them, there'd be no network, just exhausted messengers collapsing under open skies. Every postal station, called an urtu, was a blend of pit stop logistics, hub mini fort stable, and occasionally dinner theater. Some were simple affairs, a few yurts, a well, a grazing area, and a family or two running the show. Others, in more strategic locations, were fortified with wooden walls and staffed like tiny military outposts. Think of them as Airbnb meets medieval UPS with a hint of frontier survivalist. The people who ran these stations weren't just caretakers. They were part of a state-backed institution. The Mongol Empire issued paisa official medallions or plaques that identified those authorized to use and manage the postal system. Riders wore them, and so did the station masters. It was the medieval version of flashing your badge and saying, "Step aside, I'm on official pony business." Station life was both routine and unpredictable. You had a constant rhythm of horses to feed riders, to host documents to process, and supplies to track. But you also had to deal with unexpected weather, sudden inspection visits, lost riders, and the occasional eagles stealing your laundry. Yes, eagles, big ones. You learned to tie your socks down. Tonight, the station is buzzing. A caravan passed through earlier, leaving behind the scent of cumin yak butter and low-stakes gossip. The station master, a broad-shouldered woman with a braid that could lasso a cow, is overseeing dinner prep. You're handed a wooden bowl of noodle stew, thick, salty, suspiciously goat-flavored, and you accept it like a gift from the Khan himself. One fun tidbit: some Mongol stations doubled as inns for envoys or traveling officials. This led to the development of regional comfort packages, a bundle of nicer food, warm bedding, and even recorded songs or stories shared orally by station keepers. You haven't lived until you've fallen asleep next to a snoring courier while someone recites the epic of Gazer Khan in 3-hour increments. You settle by the fire, letting your pony rest outside with the others. Sparks drift upward like tiny fireflies, and you hear soft laughter from one of the yurts. Someone telling a joke about a Chinese diplomat who forgot which way was east. It's strange, this world. At once so foreign and yet comfortingly human. People still eat, laugh, complain about the weather, even if their idea of express delivery involves a week of nonstop galloping and dangerously undercooked mutton. Historians still debate how many stations existed in total. Conservative estimates suggest several hundred scattered across the empire's heartlands, with more added during periods of rapid expansion. What's agreed upon is that station spacing was remarkably regular, usually every 25 to 30 kilometers, depending on terrain. Close enough for a hard day's ride, far enough to avoid horse fatigue. The Empire also maintained a class of relay supervisors, experienced riders who traveled the network not to carry messages, but to check in on stations. They tested horse conditions, inspected food stores, and occasionally posed as riders to assess how well the system functioned under pressure. Think of them as the secret shoppers of the 13th century. You lie back now, your stew finished, the stars crowding overhead like old friends. The smell of wood smoke clings to your clothes. You half listen to someone tuning a two-stringed Morin Kur, the Mongolian horsehead, fiddle its low notes drifting like fog through the night. And just when you think it couldn't get any more charming, someone passes you a warm brick wrapped in felt, a makeshift bed warmer, straight from the fire. You cradle it like treasure. There's a strange peace in the rhythm of this life. Each station a tiny hearth in a dark, sprawling empire. Each rider a moving spark. And you, right now, you're part of that ancient current sleeping under a sky that looks exactly like it did 800 years ago. You close your eyes. You still have miles to ride tomorrow. But tonight the station holds you safe. Morning doesn't so much arrive as slink in a pale glow at the edge of the yurt, followed by the smell of boiled millet and horses relieving themselves near your pillow. You stretch, creak your joints like ancient door hinges, and emerge into crisp air that somehow smells both clean and suspiciously like goat. Your pony is already saddled. Someone's even brushed its tail. You nod your thanks to the sleepy stable boy who nods back with the air of a 9-year-old war veteran. Back in the saddle, you trot toward the next stretch of the network, one of the long-haul runs. Fewer stations here, more wilderness. A test of the system's reach and your own backside's endurance. This is where the Mongol relay network truly shined over vast, mostly empty terrain, where other civilizations gave up. While Europe was still squinting at crumpled maps and asking, "But where is Cathay?" Mongol riders were blasting across the steppes like human Wi-Fi, delivering intelligent census data, royal decrees, and occasionally very urgent shopping lists. Now remember your paisa, the engraved badge of imperial authority. Out here, it's more than ID, it's your golden ticket. This little medallion lets you demand a fresh horse shelter or food from any subject of the Khan. It also makes you untouchable to bandits, at least in theory. Woe to the unlucky robber who holds up a relay rider. The punishment for interfering with mail was, shall we say, career limiting. Still, the occasional opportunist tried. One fringe legend found in a Persian chronicle tells of a thief who posed as a rider, complete with a forged paisa. He got 3 days into the network before a station master noticed he was holding the badge upside down. He was tied to a runaway horse and, depending on which version you read, either exiled or rearranged into an unrecognizable shape. Anyway, the real brilliance of the Mongol postal system wasn't just reach, it was integration. This wasn't a separate department from the military or the state. It was the military and the state. Messages from the Khan went to governors, generals, merchants, spies, census takers, and border officials, all at speeds that shocked even seasoned bureaucrats. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan personally envisioned this system in detail or whether it evolved through trial and imperial error. What's certain is that by the late 13th century, it could outpace any European courier service by weeks, if not months. Some routes averaged 200, 300 kilometers per day using the horse relay method. That's like mailing a papyrus from Paris to Istanbul and having it arrive before you finish making dinner. Let's take a moment to appreciate the math here, one writer. One message, dozens of horse swaps, sleep in 90-minute bursts if at all. You eat in the saddle, relieve yourself in motion, and by the time your message reaches its final destination, you've personally experienced four kinds of weather, two attempted mugging incidents, and at least one spiritual revelation brought on by fermented yak butter. Speaking of which, you pause, now crouch beside a low stream. The water's cold, mountain-fed, and moving fast. You fill your flask, splash your face, and watch your pony drink like it's about to burst. These are the uncharted zones. Riders kept mental records of rivers, valleys, and resting trees, not just stations. One bent pine near a cliff was famous for sheltering riders during blizzards. It's not on any map, but everyone knew it as Old Elbow. You'll pass it in an hour. Now about horses, Mongolian ponies weren't fancy. They weren't tall. They didn't have names like Wind Dancer or Sir Hoofington, but they were legendary. Compact, tough, ridiculously sure-footed, and able to survive on frozen grass and the occasional bark. Riders swapped them frequently, but grew attached. Some even claimed certain ponies could remember stretches of the route and steer themselves while the rider napped, which is both impressive and mildly terrifying. Your current mount is a gray mare with one ear missing, perhaps from frostbite, perhaps from an argument with a goose. She trots with purpose and smells faintly of moss. You trust her implicitly. Midday arrives as you crest a long hill, wind in your face, sun warming your shoulders. In the distance, nothing. Just the endless, shivering carpet of the steppe, dotted with herds, clouds, and the occasional vulture doing lazy circles. And somewhere out there, another rider is headed toward you with a dispatch meant for someone 900 kilometers away. Did they cross this same stream? Did they sleep at that same station? Did they too fall off their horse while reaching for a runaway meat dumpling? It's all part of the same thread. An empire bound not by walls or borders, but by motion. You ride not just for the Khan, but for the system itself, for the miracle of being connected in a world that so often isn't. And that's the thing, the Mongol Empire wasn't just about conquest. It was about communication, coordination, the simple, boring, profoundly beautiful act of keeping in touch. You adjust your saddle blanket, retie your satchel, and give your horse a gentle nudge. The next station is still 6 hours away. Plenty of time for the wind to whisper another song through the grass. It's getting darker now, not because the sun is setting, but because a storm is creeping in from the east, one of those horizontal, sulking kinds of weather that doesn't quite announce itself so much as start wetting your boots before you know what's happening. You hunch forward on your pony, pulling your felted coat tighter, and wish just briefly that the Mongols had invented umbrellas. This stretch of the relay system is trickier, less predictable, fewer markers. The terrain here is more varied, broad grasslands that suddenly collapse into rocky gulches Muddy gullies, dry riverbeds that haven't flowed in a decade. A cartographer's nightmare. But your pony keeps moving like she's been here before. And honestly, she probably has. Mongol postal horses had better directional instincts than most modern apps. You pass a cairn in Ofu stacked with stones, old prayer scarves, and a single sheep skull bleached perfectly white. Riders often left offerings here for luck, for safe passage, for good weather or working knees. You tie a thread from your sleeve to the pile and whisper a little wish. No blisters today. The wind tugs it out of your mouth and carries it down the valley like a blessing or a joke. The next station appears just in time, half hidden behind a scraggly outcrop, smoke curling from its chimney, a cluster of horses nodding in the paddock like sleepy bureaucrats. You ride in soggy, grumpy, and mildly heroic. The station keeper waves. You wave back. You don't even have to say anything. He takes one look at your face and brings you hot soup and a foot towel. You love this man. As you warm your hands by the fire, another rider arrives, soaked, disheveled, bearing an oil-sealed tube marked with the imperial symbol. He nods once, mutters something about washed-out paths near the Orkhon River, and collapses next to the stove. The station master grunts sympathetically and hands him a bowl of something that smells like pickled turnip and ambition. This is what the postal relay looks like in motion, not just horses and maps, but real people braving real weather to keep an empire functioning. And sometimes functioning means standing in a puddle next to a stranger who smells like a wet sheep and not even minding. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Think about the big picture. The Mongol Empire at its height spanned over 9 million square miles from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Eastern Europe. That's almost the size of North America. And yet Genghis Khan could receive intelligence about troop movements in Persia and issue orders to northern China within a few weeks. Weeks. This wasn't just impressive, it was unheard of. No other civilization at the time had a communication system even remotely comparable in scale or efficiency. The Romans had roads, the Chinese had couriers, but the Mongols had horses stations, strict regulations, and a cultural obsession with fast, reliable messaging. They built the nervous system of the ancient world, and it pulsed with hoofbeats. One quirky detail: messages weren't always written. In more remote regions or when time was short, information was passed orally from rider to rider like a very high-stakes game of telephone. Experienced messengers were trained to memorize complex messages word for word. You'd think this would lead to errors, but somehow it worked. Either that or half the Mongol Empire operated on confident miscommunication. Hard to tell. Historians still debate whether certain key policies like the Yasa legal code or taxation schemes spread more effectively because of this rapid communication. Some argue that the empire's longevity, despite its vastness and diversity, hinged almost entirely on its ability to stay coordinated. When the network faltered, as it occasionally did, things fell apart fast. Back in the station, you finish your soup, dry your boots, and inspect the next leg of the route sketched onto a battered scroll. A steep climb through a rocky pass, then a flat stretch past an old abandoned station. Locals say it's haunted, but they also say goats can sing if you give them enough kumis, so you're not too worried. You sleep on a cot made from stretched horsehide and dream about mailbags. In the morning, you wake up to find your coat repaired and your pony fed. You didn't ask anyone to do it. They just did. That's how the system worked, small kindnesses threaded through vast impersonal machinery. A bureaucratic miracle stitched with felt and oat gruel. You mount up. The storm has passed. The air smells like wet grass and distant thunder. Ahead of you, another 50 kilometers, a message tucked against your chest, a system that hums quietly under your saddle. And behind you, a long chain of hoofprints already fading into the earth. The sky today is a wide sheet of dull pewter, the kind of color that makes everything beneath it look flatter, quieter, and somehow more poetic. The grass rolls gently like the hem of an ancient robe, and your pony's hooves thud steadily into the packed earth. No wind, no birds, not even another rider in sight, just the long, slow rhythm of motion and breath. You're on the inland plains, now moving through one of the lesser-known southern corridors of the Mongol relay system. It doesn't get as much press as the major trans-Eurasian routes, but it's no less important. This trail connected small kingdoms and semi-autonomous zones vassals who owed tribute and gossip to the Khan just like everyone else. And they had plenty to gossip about. One forgotten chronicle from a Tangut scribe mentions a message about a stolen shipment of cinnamon that made it from Karakoram to Dunhuang in 4 days, each leg covered by fresh riders and fresh horses. That's about 1,000 kilometers, give or take the number of detours caused by sandstorms, hostile border patrols, or particularly stubborn goats. What's wild is that all this was done under a strict system of accountability. Riders weren't just expected to deliver messages. They were timed, evaluated, occasionally rotated out if they were too slow or had the gall to fall asleep during relay stops. You can't help but feel a bit self-conscious now, nudging your pony a little faster just in case some ancient ghost inspector is watching from the clouds. The station you reach this time is a bit more humble, no stone foundation, just thick mud walls and a thatched roof held down with rocks. Inside, the air is dense with the smell of boiled onions and saddle leather. A woman in her 70s greets you with all the enthusiasm of someone who has seen 4,000 riders and finds you slightly above average. She hands you a message tube bound with silk string. You pause curious. This one's thicker than usual. Imperial tax order, she says, already spooning gruel into a bowl for you. Some village tried to pay in walnuts. You raise an eyebrow. Not even good walnuts, she mutters. You don't ask further. As you eat, she tells you about the horses here, tougher than usual, bred for the hills nearby, slightly meaner. They'll bite if you mount wrong. She says this like it's a feature, not a flaw. You finish your food, stretch your legs, and walk around the corral for a bit before choosing a sturdy, mud-brown gelding with a scar across his nose and the suspicious gaze of someone who's been disappointed by humans before. Out on the trail again, you reflect on something curious: how many people it actually took to make this whole relay system run. The riders got the glory, or at least the saddle sores, but behind them were hundreds, even thousands of support roles. Station masters, horse breeders, leather workers, fodder collectors, route planners, translators. Not to mention the people who built and maintained the stations themselves. Historians still argue whether this relay system functioned as a top-down military institution or as a more decentralized, semi-cooperative structure involving local stakeholders. Some evidence suggests that certain station keepers were hereditary positions passed down like bakeries or stubborn cats. Others point to strict record-keeping found in imperial archives that imply micromanagement from the capital. Either way, what's clear is that this wasn't a rough and ready Pony Express thrown together by accident. It was a deliberately structured, resource-intensive, and sometimes absurdly efficient operation. Mongol leaders recognized early on that conquest alone wasn't enough. You had to communicate across what you conquered or risk watching it fall apart like overcooked dumplings. A little further down the path, you pass a ruined outpost, just a collapsed wall, and a few rotting beams all covered in scrub and shadow. It hasn't been used in decades, probably built during Ogedei Khan's expansion efforts. You dismount briefly to stretch and let your horse graze. On one wall, you spot something scratched into the wood, three simple lines that might be initials or maybe just tally marks. You run your fingers across them, wondering who made them. Some exhausted courier, perhaps, who stopped here to catch his breath and remind himself that he still existed. You know the feeling. Before leaving, you leave a mark too. Nothing dramatic, just a small pebble tucked under a post the way some riders did for luck. You mount again, and your horse snorts like he thinks this whole superstition thing is beneath him. Later, as the sun dips toward the west and begins to stain the sky orange, you reach the edge of a wide floodplain. It's beautiful in a desolate kind of way, flat and shimmering with golden grass, swaying under a thin veil of mist. The perfect place to ride fast. You lean forward. Your mount responds instantly. The two of you break into a gallop, hooves pounding, wind roaring past your ears like the hush of 1,000 whispered secrets. This is the part of the job nobody talks about, the rare moments of exhilaration, of speed, of almost flying. You're not just delivering a message, you are the message. And for now, the world stretches out beneath you, vast and soft and old and quiet. By the time you slow down again, your thighs are vibrating and your pony is foaming lightly at the flanks, though he still looks smug, as if he enjoyed outrunning the horizon line. You pat his neck and murmur thanks, which he ignores in favor of grazing on a dry clump of weed that's probably older than you. This next segment of the route dips down toward a shallow valley, where riverbeds crisscross the grass like faded veins. During the spring melt, this whole area floods, turning the trails into mucky chaos. But now it's dry, cracked, and oddly peaceful, just the occasional buzz of insects and the soft crunch of hooves. You come across a group of herders leading a caravan of shaggy yak's bells, jingling like sleepy laughter. One of them waves you over and offers a gourd of fermented mare's milk. It's fizzy warm and tastes like yogurt left in the sun too long, but refusing would be rude, so you drink and smile with heroic enthusiasm. They laugh not approvingly and go back to wrangling a yak who's clearly in a union dispute. Small encounters like this were surprisingly common for Mongol couriers. The yam system wasn't isolated. It ran straight through towns, pasture lands, market crossroads. Riders often picked up local gossip or even acted as informal messengers for villagers who couldn't afford official dispatches. And because the empire prized information almost as much as horses, that gossip sometimes made it all the way to the capital. You continue on thinking about the riders who came before you, some of whom became legends in their own right. There's one in particular you keep hearing stories about. No one knows his name, only that he once rode for 4 straight days through sleet and mountain winds to deliver an urgent message to a general outside Bukhara. When he finally arrived, he collapsed frostbitten but alive. The general read the dispatch, nodded, and said, "Late." It was apparently a joke. No one laughed. The rider supposedly just blinked once, passed out, and was promoted the next morning. Whether that's true or not, riders had real incentives. Mongol couriers were often exempt from taxes, received generous stipends, and had legal protection across the empire. Insulting one was punishable by a public flogging, or worse, being assigned to stable cleaning duty during lambing season. And if you were really good, you might get noticed by one of the khans themselves. A few riders were eventually recruited as advisors, scouts, even ambassadors. One peculiar case, a former courier who'd memorized so many regional dialects that he became the official translator between Mongol officers and Persian merchants. His secret: he claimed he just listened carefully and pretended to understand until he actually did. Honestly, that might be the most relatable historical fact so far. Historians still argue whether the Mongol postal system inspired later models in Persia, the Ottoman Empire, and even Renaissance Europe. Some scholars suggest that Marco Polo's glowing account of the Mongol yam influenced early Italian courier guilds. Others roll their eyes at that and point out that postal systems are like soup. Everyone invents it eventually, and no one gets full credit. You spot a ridge up ahead and climb slowly toward it. The incline is steep, but the view at the top makes your thighs forgive you. From here, the entire river valley stretches out like a wrinkled map. You can see herds in the distance, a glimmering patch that might be a lake, and on the far side a smudge of smoke. Another station. It's nearing dusk. The light has that golden syrupy quality that makes everything feel like a folk song. Your pony seems to notice too. He trots with renewed energy, ears perked forward, hooves striking the ground like he's auditioning for an epic poem. When you finally arrive at the station, it's quiet. Not abandoned, just resting. A pair of oxen are tied to a post. The station master, a round-faced man with an incredible mustache and zero tolerance for small talk, checks your seal and waves you inside. You hand over the latest dispatch and receive your next packet. This one is sealed with deep red wax and bears the mark of a provincial governor. You wonder what's inside. A trade report, a marriage proposal, a formal complaint about soup rations. You'll never know. The code of the yam was strict. Riders couldn't read messages under penalty of public humiliation, often involving very cold water and skeptical chickens. The station master offers you a small meal, barley, onion, dried fish, and a sauce that tastes suspiciously like sadness. You eat it anyway. While you chew, he tells you about a former courier who passed through just last week. Said he was retiring. The man grunts. Going to open a candle shop in Kiva. Can you imagine? You actually can. After weeks on horseback through wind, snow, and soup-flavored regret, a candle shop sounds nice. You sleep that night under a roof patched with old saddle leather, wrapped in a blanket that smells like woolen stories. You dream of horses lined up neatly like books waiting to be opened, waiting to run. By morning, the station is already a gentle blur behind you, swallowed by mist and memory. Your horse today is older, grayer around the eyes, with a gait like a cautious librarian, but his pace is steady and his breath calm. That's good. Today's route will be slower, winding through foothills and damp forest paths, where speed is traded for sure footing and fewer ankle-twisting regrets. You enter the woods as the sun peers between the trees like a nosy neighbor. Light pools in the underbrush, birds call out gossip to one another, and your mount flicks his ears like he's trying to ignore them. This was one of the lesser-known forest corridors of the relay system, used primarily in warmer seasons. In winter, it iced over so badly it once trapped a courier and 5 fresh horses for 3 days. He reportedly survived by sharing his rations and reading the messages aloud for entertainment. The horses were apparently very polite listeners. Along this route, you notice signs that the Mongols didn't just dominate open steppe, they adapted to nearly every terrain imaginable. In forested areas like this where visibility was limited and sound was muffled by pine needles and damp moss, special watchtowers had sometimes been built to keep relay points in touch. You even spot a crumbling stump of one now more tree than tower at this point swallowed by ivy and tilted like it just gave up on being useful. Inside there's a carving barely visible on the wood. It's a stylized horse, all muscle and motion, surrounded by spirals. You smile, probably left by a bored watchman trying to stay awake. Maybe not much has changed in 700 years. These stations weren't just about logistics. They were little oases of humanity tucked into wild terrain. Some had small shrines inside tokens for safe travel. Others were rumored to host competitions between riders. Who could saddle the fastest, who could recite the most verses from the secret history of the Mongols without falling asleep? The record, according to one anonymous source, was 3 hours, 14 yawns, and one impromptu nap. As you follow the twisting trail downhill, the train opens up into a broad clearing. You pause for a moment to water your horse at a shallow stream. The water is icy, full of mountain melt, and the horse dunks his nose in happily. You wash your face, breathing in the scent of moss, damp bark, and something else simmering stew. Sure enough, the next station comes into view not far beyond, nestled into the base of a moss-covered bluff. It's larger than the last few stone walls reinforced with timber, a watchtower still mostly intact, and a line of horses tethered in the shade. You're not alone here. Inside, you find 3 other riders finishing their meals. They nod, offer a spot by the fire, and resume their quiet, sleepy chewing. One of them, a woman with windburned cheeks and a laugh like dry paper, offers you a bowl of stew. Goat, she says, or maybe ambitious sheep. It's salty, fatty, and perfect. The 4 of you talk softly, mostly travel stories, weather gripes, and one heated debate about saddle design. One courier insists he's sewn extra padding into his because my tailbone isn't made of bronze. Another claims to have ridden with no saddle at all, just sheer willpower and a good relationship with gravity. You're all heading in different directions, but for a brief moment it feels like a traveling guild. A sleep-deprived, saddle-sore, slightly odd guild of people who've memorized the empire by hoofbeats. Historians still argue whether these courier communities were officially organized or simply evolved out of necessity. Some letters refer to rider circles, small informal groups that shared advice, swapped horses, and looked after each other when roads got dangerous. Others argue that the YAM network was so tightly controlled that socializing was discouraged. But even bureaucracies can't prevent people from needing each other. After a brief rest and another goad or ambitious sheep snack, you're on the move again. The path now follows an old river course, mostly dry, scattered with smooth stones, and the occasional startled marmot. The landscape rolls gently open enough to make you feel like you're riding across a forgotten map. Your thoughts drift to the bureaucrats who managed all this, the paper pushers behind the postal miracle. Mongol administration wasn't just yurts and arrows, it was paperwork, and lots of it. Ledgers tracked message origins, destination times, horse health, food supplies. One surviving record lists how many saddle buckles were repaired in a single year. Spoiler, it's more than you'd guess, unless you've personally argued with leather in sub-zero temperatures. There's even debate among historians about how messages were prioritized. Some say there was a clear hierarchy, military orders at the top, then economic reports, then noble correspondence, and way down at the bottom, weird uncle messages like, please return my goat. Others argue that local governors often ignored the central system entirely and used yam routes to send birthday greetings and passive-aggressive complaints about soup. As you ride into the golden light of afternoon, the road smooths out again. Another ridge, another view, this time of distant smoke spiraling upward from multiple points. A town. You're nearing the edges of the steppe heartland now. And though the system still feels strong here, the stations are bigger, the roads more worn, and the villages more common. You get the sense that things are shifting, becoming more about trade than conquest, more about structure than sprinting. But even now out here, far from the capital and the palace tents, you carry something important. A message, yes, but also proof. Proof that the empire breathes, that its lungs are made of wind and hoofbeats, and that somehow you are part of that breath. The next morning finds you waking beneath a rustling canvas awning, where the wind fingers through the tent flaps like an indecisive cat. Your legs ache, your back protests, and your elbows, for some reason, feel like they've been personally insulted by a small deity. But there's tea bitter smoky, and the temperature of molten lava which you sip cautiously as the sun creeps across the horizon, like it's also tired of this job. Today's stretch of the journey will trace what was once one of the YAM system's longest uninterrupted links, from the inner steppe zones near Karakoram to the northeastern tributaries that fed into the empire's trade arteries. You're entering a section where the line between postal route and diplomatic highway blurs entirely. Foreign envoys use these same roads, bumping elbows or hooves with exhausted couriers like you. That odd blur of hierarchy was a unique Mongol innovation, an empire where the royal cousin and the sweaty saddle courier might pass each other on the same dirt track, nod once, and keep moving. But don't expect a smooth ride just because of the prestige. This stretch is infamous. They call it the Whispering Spine, not because it's haunted, though it absolutely is, according to two night guards and one suspicious goat, but because of how the winds snake through the canyons, carrying voices from other riders you never actually see. You take a moment to check your satchel. It contains a tightly wrapped scroll with a wax seal featuring a falcon, the symbol of a military commander stationed near the border. The message is likely a logistics update, troop movement order, or a request for more goats. Hard to say. Your job is to carry, not to pry. Historians still argue whether the Yam couriers knew the contents of their deliveries. Some say they had strict rules against opening anything under pain of serious eyebrow singeing. Others suggest there was a secret culture of code breakers among writers who would peek at documents during long layovers just to stay informed. One popular theory is that songs and riddles passed between stations contained coded versions of recent news. Imagine getting battle updates from a guy singing about a lost chicken, efficiency Mongol style. The path ahead narrows again as you ascend a shallow ridge. The trees give way to scrub, and the ground becomes sun-bleached and rocky. This is marmot country. They pop up from little dirt forts chirping like overexcited messengers, only to vanish at the sound of your horse's hooves. You offer a royal wave to one particularly bold marmot who seems unimpressed. At the top of the ridge, the wind hits like a slap from a particularly enthusiastic pillow. It howls between rock outcrops, whistling into your ears and flapping your cloak. This is where those whispers begin. You hear them, snippets of sound bouncing off stones. Your own voice. Another rider, or just the wind, remembering stories from long ago. The Mongols believed in sacred landscapes, mountains, with memories, rivers that judge you silently. This canyon, with its eerie acoustics, may well have been one of them. There's a legend recorded by a visiting Persian scholar about a courier who vanished into this pass and returned a week later with a message no one remembered sending. He claimed the wind gave it to him. Quirky nonsense, maybe. But when your compass is a horizon and your map is your memory, a talking wind doesn't seem too far-fetched. You descend into the canyon proper, where a strange quiet wraps around you. The usual bird calls vanish. Even the horse is quiet. Only the occasional clack of stone under hoof interrupts the silence. Halfway through the canyon, you find a curious carving etched into the wall, a stylized map, not of the empire but of stars. The postal system, it seems, had its share of skywatchers. Riders often relied on constellations for navigation when all else failed. Some stations even had primitive star charts used to predict weather or simply to pass the time. One surviving anecdote mentions a courier who taught his horse to stop walking whenever Orion disappeared. The result was efficient in winter, frustrating in cloudy spring. You press on, eventually leaving the canyon behind just as the sun reaches its peak. Your stomach votes for lunch, but there's no station nearby, just a crooked tree, a rust-colored rock, and a patch of flattened grass that clearly says, "Picnic here, brave traveler." You unwrap a hard biscuit the size and density of a cobblestone, softened only slightly by a smear of dried apricot paste. It's edible, barely, but the horse looks at you enviously, so maybe you're just being dramatic. Nearby, you spot the remains of an old station. Only the foundation stones remain poking through the soil like forgotten molars. A few scraps of charcoal-blackened wood lie scattered nearby. A fire bandit's bureaucratic downsizing. Historians still debate how many stations were abandoned during times of drought or conflict. The YAM system was impressive, but not invincible. There were raids, mismanagement, occasional collapses. Sometimes nature won flash floods, earthquakes, locust swarms with no respect for paperwork. Yet even in their ruin, these places linger. Some Mongol descendants still avoid sleeping near former yam posts, saying the ground remembers too much travel. Others claim the best horses are born from lines that once galloped the relay routes, as if speed is inherited like cheekbones or sarcasm. You finish your meal, stretch out your legs, and lean against the warm rock for a moment. The breeze carries the faintest trace of smoke from a station further down the valley. Another day's end is coming, and yet even now mid-journey you sense something odd. A rhythm, not just the pace of hoof and heartbeat, but something deeper, like you're following the echo of thousands of riders before you, as if the very path hums with all their journeys compressed into dust and hoofprint. You mount again, this time more slowly, letting your limbs creak and pop like badly tuned instruments. The road beckons. The journey stretches onward. And though there's still far to go, the wind behind you feels like encouragement. By now, your limbs have achieved that exquisite combination of stiffness and numbness that only seasoned riders know. Your knees don't quite bend, but you're weirdly fine with it. The horse has stopped trying to throw you into bushes for fun, which might mean you've finally bonded or it's plotting something bigger. Either way, you press on. The valley opens out ahead, spilling into a wide grassy plain. This is the run-up to one of the more celebrated stretches of the Yam system, the Thunder Road, as it's sometimes called in Mongol songs. Here the landscape flattens into a perfect corridor of galloping potential. No hills to dodge, no boulders to skirt, just windgrass sky and the soft thudding of hooves like a heartbeat sync to empire. You're not alone. In the far distance, you spot another rider, a flicker of motion and dust just out of shouting range. You don't wave. Riders rarely did. Time was a luxury neither of you could afford. There's a silent kinship in that brief sighting, though, like two comets passing on separate orbits, but sharing a mutual respect for velocity. The Mongols had a word urungho for duty wrapped in pride. It wasn't just about delivering messages, it was about embodying the speed and reach of the empire itself. You weren't just a rider, you were the infrastructure, the blood in the arteries, the footstep of command. Romantic right until your saddle rash reminds you that arteries don't usually get blisters. The Thunder Road stretches for nearly 100 versts, an old Russian measurement the Mongols eventually adopted. Oddly enough, they picked up units of distance from all their conquered territories, Persian farsangs, Chinese Lirus versts. Historians still argue whether this made communication more flexible or more confusing than a multilingual goat auction. You press your horse into a full gallop and for once it agrees without complaint. The speed is exhilarating. Grass blurs beneath you. Your scarf whips around like it's trying to escape to a more stationary profession. You feel lighter, looser. For a moment, you almost forget you've been living on hard biscuits and yak milk for 3 days. Along this route, couriers could clock extraordinary speeds over 200 miles in a single day, according to some accounts. It wasn't just the terrain or the horses. It was the system, the precision of relays, the minimal baggage, the priority clearance over any other traveler. If you met a caravan on this road, they had to move. No debate. The Yam courier was the closest thing to divine right you could get without a crown. Halfway down the Thunder Road, you find a curious structure. Not a station, those are better hidden. This is a stone marker, tall and slender, carved with script that flows like wind over water. It's a decree stone, one of many erected by Genghis Khan and his successors, inscribed in multiple languages, Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, even Greek. Their purpose to declare rights laws or permissions like a medieval billboard, but with fewer questionable real estate ads. This one reads something akin to, "Let no man delay the rider under penalty of loss of nose." You squint. Yep, definitely the nose. Mongol justice didn't always believe in subtlety. You make a mental note not to cause any delays and ride on. A few miles further, you pass a stone cairn crowned with horse skulls bleached white by time and sun. It's a memorial of sorts. Riders would sometimes mark the spots where faithful mounts collapsed. Mongol culture viewed horses with deep reverence. They weren't just transport, they were companions, colleagues, sometimes even family. Losing one wasn't just a logistical hiccup, it was grief in motion. You pause here instinctively patting your own horse's neck. The old brute pretends not to care, but you swear its ears twitch slightly in acknowledgement. Quirky tradition alerts some Mongol riders believed that when a particularly noble courier horse died, its spirit joined the wind to guide future messengers. Not quite reincarnation, more like becoming part of the infrastructure in a metaphysical sense. There's even one preserved song where the wind whinnies before a good ride. You try to listen, nothing yet, maybe later. As dust starts draping the sky in soft purples and molten gold, you approach the final station before the capital perimeter. This one is different, larger, with multiple yurts, a small stone watchtower, and the warm woodsy smell of recent stew. Yes, food that wasn't dried 17 times and salted like it owed someone money. The station chief, a woman with a long braid and weather-worn hands, greets you with a nod and a bowl. No pleasantries, just beef barley and the greatest broth you've ever tasted. You eat like someone trying to impress the gods with chewing technique. She asks where you're from. You reply with your home station code. She grunts, clearly unimpressed. Then she asks if you saw the storm flag. You blink. Storm flag. Apparently a dust storm is moving in from the north. They've raised flags along the route, a visual alert system borrowed from Chinese beacon towers, but adapted with Mongol efficiency. If you missed it, well, maybe check your peripheral vision next time, or take fewer naps against suspiciously warm rocks. Historians still debate the full extent of the Yam's weather communication system. Some say it relied entirely on word of mouth between stations. Others believe rudimentary signal fires or color-coded fabrics played a role. One odd theory involves pigeons trained to mimic hawk calls, but that may be more poetry than policy. Either way, you make the decision to wait out the storm here. The wind is already shifting, bringing grit into your teeth and a chill across your neck. Inside the main yurt, the fire crackles low. You wrap yourself in a borrowed wool cloak, its edges singed from past use. Around you, other riders rest, some snoring softly, others whispering jokes that don't need translation. There's a comfort in the shared silence, a rhythm to it. You've now traveled across hundreds of miles, met strangers who never once doubted your right to be here, eaten meals cooked over fires that never seem to go out, and passed messages that might just change a border, save a life, or order 300 fur coats for a very cold general. As the wind howls outside and the fire dims within you, feel something rare in a system built for speed stillness, and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll ride again. Morning doesn't so much dawn as it stretches slow golden fingers across a charcoal sky, prying open the world with the sort of stubborn gentleness only step mornings know. You're awake before your body fully agrees with the idea. Your joints voice their objections with every move, and your face feels like it slept on a pillow made entirely of camel hair and regret. But the wind has quieted, the storm passed in the night, and your road is waiting. You're given one last cup of salty milk tea called sute tsai. It's a comfort drink beloved across the Mongol world. Warm, slightly greasy, and oddly addictive. It's also allegedly good for the gut, though modern scientists and medieval couriers may disagree on how. You drink it anyway because at this point your stomach's forgotten what normal feels like. Outside, your next horse is ready, short, compact, with the haunted look of an animal that knows exactly how far you're about to go. Mongol postal horses weren't bred for looks. They were tough, sure-footed, and weirdly aerodynamic in the way that only flat-backed fury can be. Their stamina was their beauty. That and the ability to eat snow like it was a valid water source. You mount up and begin the final leg of your journey toward the Khagan's court. This area of the steppe is no longer wild and open. It's curated, if you will. Closer to the capital roads are better maintained markers, more frequent even small bridges in place for streams that would have previously soaked your boots to comedic effect. You get the sense that image matters here. The empire's heart beats just beyond the horizon, and it likes things tidy. As you ride, the number of travelers increases, envoys from Khwarezm, silk traders from the Yuan dynasty, a lone Armenian scribe muttering prayers as he adjusts the scrolls tied to his donkey. The Yam road isn't just for Mongol couriers anymore. It's a global artery pulsing with politics, business, and suspicious quantities of fermented fish. Along the way, you pass a wooden platform raised on stilts, an impromptu checkpoint where guards check traveler documents. Yours is a badge carved into wood and wrapped in leather, your jurage stamped with imperial authority. Mongol couriers carried these official tokens as a kind of passport meets backstage pass. Show it and gates opened. Withhold it and you'd find yourself very much on foot. You flash it and the guards wave you through with barely a glance. There's power in this badge. You've felt it at every station, in every yurt, with every bowl of stew, handed over without question. You are part of something huge, something invisible, something fast. Historians still puzzle over how a largely illiterate population managed such a complex logistics system. Some argue oral tradition was so deeply embedded in Mongol culture that instructions were rarely written, but always remembered. Others suggest a surprisingly high level of functional literacy among the elites, with scripts borrowed from Uyghur Chinese and Persian models to serve different regions. The truth likely sits somewhere in the overlap, a swirl of memory-borrowed script and an uncanny ability to make things work. The final descent into Karakorum, the empire's capital, is breathtaking if a bit dusty. It's not the monumental sprawl you might expect. More of a fortified settlement with temples, stone houses, and a palace that tries its best to look modestly imposing. But this is where the strings of the Yam system end, or knot themselves into decisions. Your message sealed in an oilskin pouch is not yours to read. You don't know if it holds a peace treaty, a dinner invitation, or simply the names of two horses that need to switch stables. You hand it over to the palace steward, who nods with a grunt so imperceptible it's practically theoretical. Just like that, your job is done. Well, until the return ride. The Yam couriers didn't rest long. There were always new messages, new roads, new weather forecasts to ignore. Sometimes riders would be given only an hour to recover before heading back the same way they came. It wasn't punishment, it was just logistics. And saddle calluses. You're led to a communal tent near the city's edge, one reserved for couriers. Inside are others like you, sprawled on cushions, nursing bowls of broth, repairing boots with deer sinew, or snoring with heroic volume. No one asks where you came from. No one boasts about distance. The only status here is speed, and you've earned your place. You hang your garage on a peg near the door like a soldier laying down arms. For now you rest. You let the fire warm your aching feet, your tea warm your stomach, and your thoughts drift not just through the journey you made, but through the entire artery of the empire that now runs invisibly under your skin. You recall that ancient proverb someone muttered back in a mountain station: a good courier leaves dust behind and silence ahead. And for the first time in days, you smile without wincing. Your message is delivered, and so are you. Word count 104. Wind down 300 words. The fire dies slow, one ember at a time. You feel it more than see it, the way the heat recedes from the edge of the yurt, how the breath of the night settles into your collarbones like a soft exhale. Outside, the hooves are quiet. No more riders tonight. The yam is still. You lay back, fingers laced behind your head cloak, pulled up just high enough to warm your ears but not crumple your hair. Above you, the fabric of the yurt curves like a sky within a sky. The stars beyond it wait patiently, blinking in their own slow code. Maybe they're couriers too, moving light wordlessly. The Mongol road was never really about speed, not entirely. It was about trust and quiet and grit stitched into every saddle. It was a promise carried through wind, snow, hoof, and bone. And tonight, for once, it's someone else's turn to carry the promise. Your breath slows. The cold doesn't bite anymore. It lingers politely, like a friend who knows not to talk just yet. And somewhere far off, a new horse takes its first step down the Thunder Road. But you don't follow this one. You rest. Tomorrow will come. The road will wait. And for now, the only message left is sleep.